Hello and welcome to the Event Plus activities of the Circle Economy at Harvard Symposium, where will we be talking to the people making the circle economy happen, rethinking how we design, make and reuse everything. I am Sergio Jacinto, a Sustainability Transition Manager, expert on circular economy and founder of Sustainability Literacy. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Roy Chang, Global Head of Sustainability Solutions, Engineering Plastics at Covestro. Covestro AG is a German company and one of the world's largest manufacturers of premium quality innovative plastics, developing over 10,000 products in three core areas: polycarbonates, polyurethanes, and coatings, adhesives, and other specialty products. Covestro today is present in 19 countries with over 70,000 workers and 30 production sites all around the world. Reading through my notes here about Roy. Roy leads the Global Sustainability Solutions of Engineering Plastics business entity of Covestro, a polymer company with a focus on the commercialization of sustainability solutions. He helped the company to launch the world's first climate-neutral polycarbonate material, among many other sustainability products and solutions. He's also one of the co-authors of the Circle Design Guidebook for the electronics industry, helping the industry to design products and business models in a circular way. Roy actively builds alliances and partnerships in the value chain to enable closed-loop recycling and better material traceability in driving the transition towards a circular economy and reduce plastics waste in the environment. Ray was born and raised in Hong Kong, spent a few years living and working in Taipei, and later finished his MBA degree in Shanghai, where he is currently based. Thank you so much for joining us today here, Roy. For me, it is early morning, still here in Amsterdam, and for you, I believe it is already late afternoon in Shanghai.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So, Roy, just to start off with our talk, how did circular economy and sustainability become a focus for Covestro?
Right. Yeah. So for the company that got independent from the Bayer Group, so before 2015 we were called Bayer Material Science, and then afterwards we became independent and listed in the German Stock Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, we already started having new sustainability targets around our R&D, around our operations, and around our businesses. So it was before the climate neutrality terms became very dominant recently in these 2 years. But it was last year where, out of the different sustainability goals, right, we particularly focused on the environmental related goals, on climate change, and we are also the provider of materials, particularly on plastics. So the plastic waste problems and around other climate issues like climate change again became the core of the focuses of the sustainability goals. So in a nutshell, back in 2020, the company actually launched a new vision. In a nutshell, it's called To Be Fully Circular. So as the new guiding principle for the transformation of a company. And that's how it started for the company to focus more on circular economy related initiatives.
And personally, how did circular economy become your focus?
Right. So my sustainability journey started 4 years ago when I joined the company. At that time, my role was called business model innovation in the business entity of polycarbonate. And at that time, one of the first projects I was already involved was to look at, while we are selling materials containing recycled plastics, is it possible that this kind of recycled plastics is actually coming from ourselves in the first place? So the closed loop idea, the material rental idea, that might lead to a new business model, for example. So at that time, with my first job at Covestro, we were already tapping into these, at that time, new ideas new concepts around business models without calling it circular at that time. So we were not fully aware about the entire circular economy related concepts. But because of the participation in recycled materials, we were already involved. And then moving forward, because of the fully circular vision that I just mentioned, our business entity also thought that, hey, it might make sense to have fully dedicated team, however small it is, right, to tackle the business side of what we call the fully circular vision. Mm-hmm. And that has a lot to do with empowering the portfolio of our materials and our products towards more circular. So that's how my personal journey started.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Towards the UN Sustainable Development and thinking also about the Planet Boundaries framework, what are your commitments in Covestro and how are you realizing them? Which ones do you think that creates bigger value for you? Maybe a different way to ask is which of them are more strategic for Covestro?
Right. I can go on and on this one, but let me try to be brief. There are obviously 17 UN SDGs, right? And particularly looking into the materials that we produce and the industries or the applications that we serve. There are 4 major themes of the UN SDGs that we participate through our products and materials. Obviously, those related to climate change, right? We're talking about alternative energy sources, so the new energy, the clean energy sector. Our materials actually provide wind blades, for example, as one of the key materials. Also, solar energy, we participated through our materials. So these are the examples that how our materials and solutions contribute to one of those climate change related SDGs. Mm-hmm. And obviously responsible consumption, for example, whereby you look into how the materials and the products that are made with materials end up in landfill, end up in the recycling chain, and how we can better, recover those products and materials back to become one of our raw materials. So, and in that sense, recycling, for example, right, and related at UN SDGs are obviously one of our key focuses. And I can elaborate on that later with more examples. But in a nutshell, right, so the climate change related UN SDGs would be our first and foremost core focuses. Mm-hmm. And then the others would including related to the increasing mobility. So we are big participant in the mobility industry. So a lot of materials are sold into the cars, the 4-wheelers, the 2-wheelers, the 3-wheelers, what have you. And e-mobility is also a big one. Yeah. With e-mobility, there's a lot of infrastructure and electric vehicle battery packs, for example. These are also very typical applications where you can find our materials. Mm-hmm. So we also participate in that. The third sets of UN SDGs related to the growing population, prosperity, would related to, for example, our textile coating industries that we serve in, and also food preservation. So a lot of our materials also go into these kind of applications, mm-hmm. Not to mention medical, healthcare, right? This is also one of our major industries. Mm-hmm. Last but not least is urbanization. So because of this related urban development related UN SDGs, we also participate through our materials in building and construction industries, affordable housing. These kind of applications are also our focus, and then also energy efficient lighting, for example. We can go on and on. We have like tens of thousands of different applications. But in a nutshell, through our products and the industry that we serve, these are the themes of the UN SDG that we participate in.
So a very comprehensive approach there. Lately, carbon emissions has become, for a majority of people, a synonym of sustainability, right? So, with the European Circular Economy Action Plan, through European initiatives, and especially lately with COP26, people are much more aware of sustainability issues. And again, a lot of times confusing sustainability just with carbon emissions and climate change. So carbon offsetting insetting is rapidly coming in fashion. How are you becoming carbon neutral in Covestro? Do you aim eventually to become carbon positive? Is something that could be in your plans? And maybe even going a little bit forward, can you tackle your carbon legacy? So the carbon that you have emitted in the past, would that be something possible for you?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So yeah, that is true that out of all the sustainability related targets, right, climate and particularly carbon is become more and more important and also very relevant for us. Talking about climate neutral, maybe later I can give you an example on the product side of climate neutrality, how in the polycarbonate space, for example, that we participate in, we reduce the carbon footprint of the product. Mm-hmm. But as the company as a whole, right, the aforementioned fully circular vision that we imposed starting last year is one way that material company like ours answers to the climate neutrality target, not just for us, but for the value chain. Because we believe we are in a very upstream position for our customers, right? Mm-hmm. Our customers are the mobility industry, the electronic industry, the textile, the constructions. They all need to reach their own climate neutrality, reduce their carbon footprint. And in that language, we always say we are their scope 3 emission, right? So whatever we do in terms of our products, our operations, would contribute to the carbon reduction of our product and our operation, would also immediately have an impact. Hopefully it's a positive impact to the scope 3 emission of the upstream scope 3 emissions of our downstream customers. And when we talk about fully circular, right, how we participate in the circular economy, what we mean by that is reusing carbon. At the end of the day, all materials like plastics, polymer, they all contain carbon. So how we can use the circular economy framework and really start recovering more and more materials that go into our raw material stream that are not coming from fossil fuel resources. That, in a nutshell, it's already reducing carbon footprint. And there are a lot of different routes that I can expand if we have time, right? How we do mechanical recycling, how we are doing in the future chemical recycling, how are we moving away from more fossil-based raw materials by working with our upstream partners, et cetera, right? How do we use more and more renewable energy? We do have a target to use 100% renewable energy in the future for all of our sites globally, because that could directly contribute to our operation, scope 2 emission, and that can translate into a lower carbon footprint of the product, again, contribute to the scope 3 emission of our downstream customers.
Maybe interrupting you there, how, specifically into renewable energies, what solutions are you looking into? Or what are you using currently?
Yeah, so that actually depends also on the availability of new renewable energy in a particular market,
the context,
in a particular city and a site that we operate in. The good news is when we companies, right, have our climate neutral goals, the countries, right, the cities, the municipalities also have their own climate neutral goals. And to reach all these climate neutral goals, no matter you're an organization, you're a city, you're a government, using renewable energy, right, improving that renewable energy infrastructure is one very obvious route. And we're already participating in it in places like Europe, in places like China. We are already proactively and also reactively using more and more renewable energy whenever it's available. Either completely through the grid that we can enjoy directly green energy, or indirectly using renewable energy contracts, etc., allocation, right, certification, etc. So these routes are all open for us, in a nutshell, our goal is to reach 100%.
Yeah, but it's very important what you're saying because, especially because Covestro is present all over the world, and so solutions are context specific. So one solution
Yes.
will not fit all. So you really have to adapt to the local technologies and also the local resources for renewables that will be in place, right? So that's super interesting to
Okay.
consider.
Hmm.
Maybe I would like to ask you to elaborate on the a front runner aspect that you mentioned, which is the chemical recycling. Could
Hmm.
you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Sure. So chemical recycling falls under one of the four strategic pillars to reach our fully circular vision and also at the end of the climate neutral targets. And that category of the pillar is called innovative recycling.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about innovative recycling, people tend to think about only mechanical recycling, where we participate in for years already. And in a layman term, right, mechanical recycling means there are products when they enter end of life, for example, a laptop, a mobile phone, or a water bottle, right? When these products reach the end of life, you recycle them, you try to separate the materials as pure as possible, and then you use those materials directly as one of your raw materials, or what we call feedstock
Mm-hmm.
in our terminology. That's usually it's called mechanical recycling, whereby a lot of recovery activities involve only mechanical approaches, right? You shred them, you clean them, you repalletize them, and then you use them. That's mechanical recycling. That's the current status.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of plastic waste streams that are not as pure, which is mixed plastics, right? There are tens of thousands of different types of plastics in the world. Usually, when we talk about plastic waste, a lot of the plastic waste is mixed with different types. When that's the case, mechanical recycling may not be possible.
Okay.
Okay, the performance of the materials is not stable, and it's not ideal, right, to reach all the requirements to become back a laptop, for example, right? There are a lot of safety performance requirement on the material side if you use engineering plastics on a laptop cover, for example. So mechanical recycling has quite some limitation. Then the second route under innovative recycling that we talked about is chemical recycling, whereby you tend to tackle those waste streams that has very mixed different types of plastics. And besides the mechanical way, you try to, for example, the buzzword is pyrolysis, right? So you try to break down the composition, the chemical composition of a material, of the plastics, into what we call the monomers, sometimes into our raw materials
Mm-hmm.
to produce our plastics. So instead of directly using the recycled materials in our production, we need this kind of chemical recycling processes to break down into usable raw materials,
Mm-hmm.
replacing, again, the traditional fossil-based raw materials that we have. But chemical recycling, some of the chemical recycling technologies have been in the market for quite some time. They are not as mature as some people wish in terms of energy efficiency. So in a lot of cases, when you do chemical recycling, you need a lot of heat, you need a lot of energy associated with this. Then the carbon footprint, right, becomes a question mark. So when we talk about innovative recycling, we're talking about how can we improve the efficiency of the chemical recycling process so that we can end up having a lower carbon footprint
Mm-hmm.
material through that technology or through the process. We also mean that can we design and develop chemical recycling technologies for a particular type of waste stream that is currently available to us, right? Again, because of the limitation of mechanical recycling, there are a lot of unused or unrecyclable waste
Yes.
that are waiting for these kind of new chemical recycling technologies to utilize. So in a nutshell, these are the things that we're working on from our R&D labs to hopefully you can see this commercially available at scale in the market in the future.
Yes, that's also super interesting because we, as a consumer, we tend to see recycling as kind of one solution that fits all, right? So recycling is the guilt-free get out of jail card that we have, and we think that everything is magically solved. But in truth, the majority of plastic that we produce, for example, here in Europe, in the most efficient countries, we had a recovery rate, or better said, a collection rate of 30%. And of that 30%, around 60% is exported to Asian countries, no longer directly to China, I believe, since around, help me here, maybe
2017.
Yeah, around 17. But it goes to countries in the peripheral to China, and then those sorted, and then China only buys the materials that are, well, better sorted, right? So it's a huge problem, but it gets away from our eyes and hearts, so we think it's solved. But yeah, that's why we also hear about the plastic all going to the ocean. But it's a super important point to make, that the problem is not plastic, of course. It's a super useful materials. There are lots of still uses that we have no other viable solutions, and where it actually outperforms most of other products, right? Like food contamination barrier, oxygen barrier, and so forth, right? And kind of like bridges there with carbon, because carbon is not the culprit. We are carbon beings. We need carbon from living, right? So the problem is the excess carbon that we are producing, for sure. I would like to ask you about something that I read about in introduction about in your short biography on your first climate neutral polycarbonate. Could you explain to us what that is, and how did you make that actually happen?
Sure. So we believe going after the carbon reduction path is one of the very key paths to reach sustainable goals. So then we were like, okay, how do we reduce the carbon footprint of the product? For your information, right? So polycarbonate is one of the many what we call engineering plastics that is available to the world. And I talked about the different applications. So polycarbonate as one type of plastics, according to our own life cycle assessment calculation, the carbon footprint, for example, right, of 1 kilogram of polycarbonate is roughly 3.4 kilogram. Okay, that's the very typical what we call virgin-based, fossil fuel-based polycarbonate that we produce. Then again, the question: how do we reduce that 3.4 kilogram of carbon footprint to zero, right, to reach climate neutral? We have two routes. One is, as I mentioned, to use non-fossil fuel-based raw materials from our petrochem side. We do that with our upstream partners. They don't use petrol. They don't use fossil fuel to crack, the raw materials that we need. Instead, they use bio waste-based raw materials to provide us with the raw materials that we need to produce that polycarbonate. I'm not a chemist. I'm not going to go through a chemical lesson here, but that's how we get our raw materials away from fossil fuel. So from that perspective, right, these are, bio waste-based raw materials. The carbon footprint is already very low. And we're talking about using that kind of raw materials would give us less than 1 kilogram of carbon footprint from cradle to our gate. And the remaining few, grams of the carbon footprint that involves in the product, we use renewable energy. And again, as I said, in places like Europe, our site is able to use renewable energy. So renewable energy's carbon footprint is literally zero. So in that sense, we can actually have a climate neutral, i.e. zero carbon footprint polycarbonate. And in polycarbonate world, we believe we're one of the first one to launch this in the market. In fact, as we speak today, we are launching this press release saying that we're able to supply from now on.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, especially when we are really, as I said, upstream in the value chain. So consumers per se, right, don't know us, rightfully so, right? They don't know, oh, actually the laptop they're using, the materials inside is plastics, and the plastics is actually coming from a company called Covestro. They may not know that, may not be aware of it. But our downstream customers, right, the laptop brands, right, the car manufacturers, they know us, and increasingly they know, again, as I said, we are their pretty important scope 3 emission contributor. So when they start having their scope 3 related emission target or emission reduction target, to be more specifically, they would turn to the supply chain and therefore turn to us and asking for that. So directly through the materials that we sell, if we're able to reduce the carbon footprint of our product, again, as I said, we are already contributing. So they're aware of it. But that's not enough, right? Like you said, maybe the minimum carbon footprint is zero of a product, right? What's next, right? Can we reach climate positive, carbon positive? I think we can, but we cannot do it alone, right? So we need to then work with all value chain partners, including downstream. So for our downstream customers, we are also promoting this term called circular design by letting them to think about materials not at the manufacturing stage of their product. Usually that's the case, right? Oh, now I already designed my products, and these are the product related requirements that I need for a material. Then I pick up a phone, call Covestro, and I ask for this kind of materials to fulfill. Then they enter mass scale production. In some cases, this is becoming too late if they want, right, to reduce their product carbon footprint, et cetera, et cetera. By circular design principles that we're promoting now, basically all we're asking is, hey, when you design your next generation product, think about how else you can make your product more circular, more recyclable, more recycle ready, or extend the product life so that your product don't end up, being in the recycler that soon, right? In terms of electronics, the product life cycle becomes so short, right? From 5 years to 2 years right now. How can you extend your product life cycle so that you can use the product longer, stuff like that? These are also circular, right? But you cannot think about these kind of strategies, right? Again, at the very late stage, you have to think about it even before you design your products. And once you start thinking about how can I prolong my product life, how can I make my product more recyclable, then you trigger a whole new set of different requirements towards the materials. You no longer only think about, can I increase the recycled content of the plastics, right, that we buy from Covestro? There's a limitation to that already. So what else can you do, right? So we promote this kind of mentality and conversation, so that please invite us, a material provider, when you design your next generation product, so that we can think about how else you can reach circular goal, environmental goal, et cetera, through materials, not just lower carbon footprint materials.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. One very important question that a lot of companies ask themselves, but also one of the most difficult messages to convey to companies, is how to find value in a sustainability strategy and how to create value from circular economy business models. Can you elaborate a little on how Convestro creates value from sustainability?
Yeah, this is currently a frequently asked questions within the organization by asking business entities like ours,
Mm-hmm.
how can we create value for the company through our circular business, first of all. So as I said, right, we participate in the polycarbonate manufacturing business. So we sell materials and we sell polycarbonate that contain recycled materials and alternative raw materials like the bio waste raw materials that we talked about. These things don't come for free and they don't come cheap in terms of the raw materials that we use. Then, for example, for recycled materials, how can we lower the cost? One direction is that can we get access to this kind of recycled materials earlier than the others? Can we get access to better quality recycled materials so that we can increase the value of our product? And to be able to do that, we need something like a closed loop model, right? So one example is actually here in China, whereby on one hand we sell our polycarbonate materials to 19-liter water bottles. Not talking about the PET water bottles that we use on a daily basis, but the really big 19-liter
Mm-hmm.
ones that you use in your office, in your home sometimes. Those are made of polycarbonate, and sometimes those are our polycarbonate. But whatever, right? Whoever provides those polycarbonate, these water bottles are actually, once they enter end of life,
Yeah.
they get recycled back.
Mm-hmm.
Not to use back to the water bottle, but sometimes downcycled, sometimes mixed with different types of plastics, therefore downcycled. Then we actually work with one of the biggest water bottlers in China called Nongfu Spring. Said, hey, wait a minute, before you discard your end of life water bottles, can we get them all? Can we get all of the 1 million water bottles per year that they discard to be one of our raw materials in the recycled chain to serve the electronic industries, right? We sell our recycled materials to the electronic industry. So can that water bottle become one of those sources? And the answer was yes. And that was a very good example to improve the value of our materials through this kind of closed loop models by getting access to very good quality and stable quality raw materials and in a very cost effective way, because that's without sorting, that's without middlemen of the recyclers, trading with each other before they end up in our pocket. So that's one example how we can create value
Yeah.
in a nutshell by having all these closed loop models. But to create value for the customers, that's kind of like a $1 million question. And I would also go back to the value propositions that we provide to the downstream customers.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, they want lower carbon footprint materials. On the other hand, they want stable quality. The performance of the material would be as good as the fossil-based version, for example. These are the value propositions that we're working very hard to answer to the customers, right? Stable quality, stable quantity, etc., etc. And through answering these needs, hopefully we can also capture the value, right, for the customers.
Mm-hmm. So that's already that leads to my next question, which is which you maybe already partially answered, which is the context specific of sustainability and circular action. So that's a context specific solution also. Can you give me any other example maybe of where you found other solutions that are also context specific, adequate to the reality?
Sure. If we follow the logic of, for example, closing the loop, for either for the customers or for ourselves, you are right that it is context specific and also continent specific, because as you said, right, talking about plastic waste, because of all these import ban of plastic waste of several countries, not just China. it will end up having an individual country taking care of your own plastic waste locally without being able to shipping all around the globe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have no choice but to, take care of your own waste at your door. So closing the loop, doing recycling would be a more localized activity, I believe. And one example, which we are still in the making, is dealing with e-waste, electronic waste. Electronic waste is very difficult to deal with because of the mixture, maybe the contamination involved in the plastic in itself. But it's in a great demand by our electronic customers. They want to use more and more electronic waste
Mm-hmm.
that they partly contribute to be honest, right? So they want to sort of have their own guilt-free solution by using not just recycled plastics, but maybe recycled plastics coming from e-waste.
Mm-hmm.
That's very difficult, and that has to be localized. You cannot, again, as I said, you cannot ship around, let alone, e-waste, but plastic waste in general.
Yeah.
And to be able to close that loop, we need to work with then local e-waste dismantler, local plastic recycler. At least you need four guys, right? You need us, you need the electronic brand to participate. And in different countries, in different continents, we are talking to different partners potentially to try closing this kind of loop, particularly on e-waste.
So building smaller loops and finding value
Yes.
in smaller loops also, right? So the smaller the loop, the biggest the value, and that includes um, uh, not moving things around our planet.
Exactly.
Shifting a little bit our conversation now towards metrics, and specifically, or starting more broadly, I would say, in terms of growth. Right, so we are in a very oriented growth economy, growth society. We want more fast fashion, fast food, fast furniture, and our growth, of course, is a triple bottom line. Sustainability is environmental, economic, and social. But a triple bottom line growth also encompasses all that dimensions, not foregoing the economical. So, what does sustainable growth mean for Convestro?
Mm-hmm. Probably I cannot answer that on behalf of the company. Maybe our CEO can. But if we have this conversation, for example, 3 months later, maybe I can give you more details about where our climate neutral roadmaps are. When do we want to achieve climate neutrality for scope 1 and 2, for a very specific one.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all the matrices or KPIs in a nutshell in the making internally. Mm-hmm. So maybe I can give you a glimpse of it. For example, when we talk about growth matrices related, I come from a business entity. So the business entity bread and butter goal is to provide the triple bottom line, as you said, people, planet, profit, particularly on the profit side. So if we're able to provide higher profit to the business, not just by selling more, but by cost down, having our production or our supply chain efficiency, et cetera, that can also already contribute. And again, circular economy would be a good vehicle, how we can make it more efficient, how we can use resources, right, more effectively and more efficiently for ourselves. So in that sense, we can already contribute to that. Another metric would be the share of our quote unquote sustainable materials, sustainable products. Right now is still only a tiny fraction of our core business, but the growth. So for the last 5 years, we saw a super strong growth, and this growth is exponential of the demand of sustainable materials from the downstream customers. So the recycled materials, the bio-waste-based raw materials, et cetera, et cetera. These demands are growing exponentially. Mm-hmm. So we would look into how much of a ratio of this kind of portfolio would consist of the entire core portfolio. At the end of the day, it would be 100%, hopefully, right? But the growth, are we able to maintain or even beat the strong growth of the market? These are all the micro matrices that we're looking into. If we're talking about business, right? Here's really about financial numbers related matrices. Other than that, it would be how much of the raw materials that we procure and we buy and we source contain sustainable share. It can come with a percentage, or it can come from absolute number, et cetera, right? So from supply chain side, from our sales side, and let alone from the operation side, right? How can we use more energy, renewable energy, as I said? How can we make our production even more efficient than before, et cetera, in all different functions or economic activities that we participate in? There will be very specific metrics. Also tied into growth, right?
Is there any framework that you use, or do you develop internally your own metrics?
Yeah, there are several frameworks that we use, but these frameworks are basically the same, having the same logic as how we were rated and how we are rated from an ESG perspective. So we participate in the different ESG ratings, right? EcoVadis, Sustainalytics, these kind of external audit or rating of our sustainable initiatives. And we would also translate these kind of external requirements as one of the references, right? When we develop our own matrices internally. They should interrelate to each other, right? Otherwise, we cannot achieve high score of the external ratings.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you, a question that's maybe it's more a global problem, maybe towards sustainability, or a detrimental aspect of the progress of sustainability. So sustainability is all about creating impact. And lately I have heard a lot of opinions, and also tend to agree that there's a big focus today on measurement, analytics and measurement, and to the extent where it forgoes actually an impact, and the whole point is about measuring. So we have mandatory ESG for companies that are listed. In January 2023, we will have mandatory ESG for companies above 250 employees. So even those non-financial disclosures, but even a lot of companies that do their non-financial disclosures voluntarily are not action prone. So they do it just for the sake of reporting, and you really don't see a lot of action there. Do you think that in one aspect, just this blind measurement might be killing sustainability, or kind of like a greenwashing, where companies just say that they're actually doing something by measuring, but in fact they do nothing?
Yeah, very difficult question, right? But it's pretty common whenever you think about KPI, right? So the old saying, right? What gets measured gets done, right? So there's always this dilemma, right? If you don't have any KPIs or any, matrices, then you're not able to push, right, where you want to achieve as a goal, and you cannot measure them. Okay, then let's do some KPIs and measurement. Then the flip side of that is people just focusing on the numbers and forget everything else. So it's always this balance, right, of how you can set up reasonable KPIs, right, comprehensive enough to cover everything, that you don't leave something out, and you don't tilt the balance so that it breaks the whole future. At the same time, it cannot be too complicated that you're bound by too many, conditions or limitations, right? I need to achieve 50 different goals, and then none of them is contradictory, stuff like that, right? So it's really, really difficult. I don't have an answer, but I see this kind of conversation, like you said, happening both externally by the regulators, by the rating agencies, by the financial world, whereby they want to have a more harmonized, what they call, approach from the ESG rating and ESG financing perspective to incentivized through financial measures, right, for companies like ours.
Mm-hmm.
There are in the process, I believe, unavoidable contradictions, right, with one standard on the other, between markets, right, taxonomy, right, big word these days, between Europe and China, right. It takes, political powers, right, to shake hands and, harmonize different approaches. If they don't, it's going to be very difficult for people like us. So yeah, very different there are different levels of complexity here, but I think people at least realize the problem right now, right? It happened in the business world for ages, right? The KPI dilemma. Now it's just that it also is happening in a sustainability world, and I think when people at least start addressing the problem, start realizing problem, and start discussing, I think positively we will go to the right direction by having a more harmonized approach, by having more, commonly understood approach for companies to adopt. Yeah. Right now, there's still different companies maybe cooking their own KPIs differently, but more and more commonly as well, right? For example, climate neutrality goals, carbon footprint, right? Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emission targets. These are more and more commonly understood and set targets that you can exchange, right? Yeah. These Scope 3 goals of our downstream customers can directly translate to our business opportunity, basically. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but have to be patient as well.
Yeah. Great answer, Roy, and not an easy one to address, because of course it's a very personal answer also. Speaking a little bit, going into circular concepts, the term closing the loop, I think it induces a lot of people in error. Because when we speak about closing the loop, we're saying in fact that we don't want materials to disappear. But an essential part of closing the loop is actually opening it to other industry partners, where the circular economy concept of waste equals food can be more effective or more efficient, because the waste of an industry might be the food for others. So you need to build circular industrial parks and so forth, and an ecosystem to be able to do this. What is Covestro's approach to this? What is your relationship to your suppliers in this instance?
Yeah, I get very excited every time I talk about closed loop because I frequently, run into this kind of conversation. For example, with a customer, take electronics as an example again. Our customers include, all these big brands of consumer electronics. Quite a lot of them also have closed loop initiatives in their sustainability targets. But when these electronics OEMs brands talked about closed loop, they could mean, take an example, Dell. Dell wants to use more recycled materials that are coming from end-of-life Dell products to close the Dell loop, quote unquote, right? So this is one of the many definitions of closing the loop, right? I don't want to contribute too much to the, maybe plastic waste problem. Therefore, I want to, use the materials that are recovered from my waste. That's a very tight loop that a company can think about and try to address. So that's one type of closing the loop. And then when you talk to companies like us, materials company, we can mean closing a loop that our materials that provide to customer A and get recovered by recycler B become the raw materials for us, same materials, yeah, but for customer C, right? Covestro closing its own loop when we talk about materials, right? Our polycarbonate, for example. That's another example of closing the loop. The third example, and that goes back to our fully circular vision. When we talk about fully circular, what are you circulating, right? At the end of the day, as I said, coming back to chemistry 101, right? We are circulating carbon, right? We are closing the carbon loop. Then it becomes another angle, maybe a similar angle, but not necessarily covering the polycarbonate that we produce, as long as it is polycarbonate.
Mm-hmm.
Or in a chemical recycling example again, as long as this can become the raw materials, like in a form of carbon, right? So when we talk, in a nutshell, we talk about closing the loop. We're talking about it could also mean that closing a loop for the carbon in different form, right? Our raw materials, our products as plastics, or as a downstream customer application, a product, right, of electronics. So different stages when you talk about closing the loop.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so whatever definition that we talk about the closing the loop, then we need different types of suppliers or partners externally to work with. We talked about the e-waste example. Then you need an e-waste dismantler. You need a plastic waste recycler to work with. You need a electronics OEM to work with in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But if we talk about chemical recycling route, if we launch our new chemical recycling technology, we don't necessarily be that operator of the chemical recycling plant, right? Then we need a partner. Maybe we need a chemical recycler,
mm-hmm.
and we need the waste collector to pump this plant with the necessary plastic waste that we need. Then we become the customer of such chemical recycling technology. We use the monomers that come from this chemical recycling output
mm-hmm.
as our input. So then you work with different types of partners. So different maturity level. Yeah. We also require different types of stakeholders.
Well, Roy, we're nearly to the end of our talk, and time just flew. I'll just ask a last question. Does product as a service, performance economy, shared economy, does it have a role for Covestro products? And also, do you source product as a service from your suppliers?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the operation side. I believe this is actually being considered and adopted to make it more efficient in terms of using our assets, right? So definitely that's one way to go. But I'm glad that you asked from the customer's perspective, when going back to the circular design principles that we just talked about, right? When our downstream customers, again, electronics, for example, when they start thinking about product as a service, rental, right? It is music to our ears, because on one hand, you need a more robust material. Our polymers, polycarbonate, last forever, mm-hmm. right? But when it's used in electronics, and when electronics life cycle becomes so short right now, in the ownership model, like private ownership model, you buy, you use, and you throw away. It's kind of like a waste for a material like polycarbonate to last that short, right? Yeah. But it actually lasts forever. So if you use product as a service, maybe you prolong the service life of that product, that enhance the strength of materials. That mm-hmm. on one hand. On the other hand, if you want to do recycling, product as a service is a great model, because the ownership of these products are no longer tens and millions of consumers, mm-hmm. but it's back to the same company who rent it out, to lease it out, right? Providing that service. Then you can talk easily, relatively, right, to that company. Hey, how can I get back all of your end-of-life products now that you have your, product as a service model? It's much, much easier to realize that. Yeah.
Great answer, Roy. Well, Roy, we just reached the end of the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a true pleasure getting your insights and hearing about Covestro and its actions towards the sustainability and circular economy. Thank you. Covestro is truly a front runner in the circular economy, creating meaningful impact in the environment and helping business understand how becoming environmental friendly can be profitable. Later this month, we will be hosting Cedric Riegenbach, the founder and inventor of the Climate Fresque, an awareness game on climate change played already by over 2020 people all over the world and currently present in 50 countries. My name is Sergio Jacinto. I'm a Sustainability Transition Manager, an expert in circular economy, and the founder of Sustainability Literacy. I hope you enjoyed the interview today with Roy Cheng, Global Head of Sustainability Solutions, Engineering Plastics at Covesta. Thank you so much and see you next time around.